getting started, and more specifically getting started with DataMiner Cube, because in this video we will connect for the very first time with our DataMiner system, and we will download and install the DataMiner Cube desktop application. So let's take a look at that. So getting started, we will first talk a little bit about the principal objectives of the DataMiner Cube application, and then we will immediately dive into the getting started. Basically open up a web browser, navigate to our system, download the application, install it, logging in and connecting to our DataMiner system. Once we have that done, we will take a closer look at the general layout of our Cube application, what we can find in there, the goodies in the header bar, things like that. And to wrap it up, I'll briefly mention some words about the DataMiner communication that is happening between the client and the server and the connection type there. So DataMiner Cube, it's really a full immersive application giving you all the goodies of your DataMiner system in one single pane of glass. You can see a screenshot here on the right hand side, so you can manage the alarms, your graphics, your data, your reporting. You have everything in one application with all the goodies you need. It is a very important application because it also allows you to configure and basically do the administrative part of your DataMiner system as well. You do also have a lightweight HTML5 version. I'll briefly show that to you as well. Note there are a lot of settings in there. I'll touch upon some of them, like for instance the possibility to change the language of the application, but also instead of going for instance for the white light mode, you can go for a darker mode if you're working in the network operations center and you prefer a little bit less bright screens. You can configure all of these settings in there. So it's really the application to go to on a daily basis to manage your DataMiner system. Now let's get connected, and we will do so by opening up a web browser, any web browser, and navigate to the IP address or URL of our DataMiner system. And I will immediately do so. So if I go to dcpdma.skyline.be, so that is our DataMiner system that we will be using throughout this training. It is available on dcpdma.skyline.be for everybody on the internet, and you can log in on there if you have credentials. So no, there could be an IP address of a local server as well, of course. I can log in on there with my domain credentials. I'll talk a little bit more about credentials and logging in later on as well. So for now, I just log in and I end up on the home page. So the home page immediately gives me an overview of the HTML5 applications because I'm running in an HTML5 compatible browser, and I can immediately go to for instance, the monitoring application. It shows me the Cube interface, but in the HTML5 lightweight application. We are not going to use the lightweight applications that are available here. I'll talk about that in another session, but I will go for the Cube desktop application. And you can install that by using the right-hand side Install DataMiner Cube button here. There are some other install options. You can go there and see some MSI installer for Alerter and things like that. We're not going to worry about that now. So we just click on the Install DataMiner Cube, go for the desktop application. If I do so, it will automatically download that Cube installer here on the lower left-hand side. I just click on there, it opens up the installer. There are just a few options, you can take a look at it. Whether you want to have a shortcut on your desktop, yes, I'm fine with that. A shortcut in your start menu, definitely. And it can start with Windows. So if I start my computer, it automatically starts the Cube launcher in your system tray as well, which is kind of convenient. So I'll leave those options as they are. So the only thing I have to do is click on install, and it will automatically install the DataMiner Cube application, and it immediately connects to dcpdma.skyline.be and download and extract the version. So that's because I was navigating to the DCPDMA over here. So it automatically connects to this server that I specified in the address bar of my web browser. And most interestingly, it will immediately download the correct version that is compatible from that server. So this is really convenient because if I will upgrade my server tomorrow, it will automatically get the new version from the server as well. And if I would have a staging system with maybe a newer version on there that I'm still testing and playing around with, it would actually be able to distinguish between the different versions of the different DataMiner systems you have. I'll come back to that as well. In my case, I'm actually logged into my computer with my domain account, so the application automatically logs in. So if DataMiner Cube tries to connect to a DataMiner server, it will first try to connect and authenticate with the credentials of your Windows operating system you already logged in with. In this case, that is immediately logging in and connecting. So I just clicked one button, install, and it is all happening automatically. But let's take a step back. What I'll do is I'll close this application again. So I installed the desktop application. So now I actually expect it to be in my start menu. So if I go there and I search for Cube, I will find the DataMiner Cube application that is installed there. So if I launch that again, I launch that once more, now I will see that actually I do have the possibility to add more DataMiner agents there. I just have one, I can click on it, it will open up the window I just previously closed. But let's take a moment to take a closer look at this window. I do have the possibility to add other DataMiner agents next to that. So I can say like, okay, I still have like a demo.skyline.be system available somewhere, and I can add that in there. So I can add a staging system and an operational system, and maybe I have several operational systems next to each other, all into this convenient startup window. Now, if I added a system, this one was automatically added. You can click on the three dots that are in the upper right-hand side of that tile, and that allows you to configure a couple of settings. First of all, you can specify an alias. Instead of the URL, maybe I want to give it like DCP in capitals with a space in between there, DMA. Set as default, that's just if the window opens, this one will be selected by default, and I can hit enter and it will connect to that one. Agent, in case there are several DataMiner nodes in your cluster, you can put a preference there on which one you want to use to connect to the DataMiner system. It's all the same result. It's just your entry point into the DataMiner system you can specify here. And the advanced is just some arguments. I'll come back to some arguments where it automatically opens up maybe a certain view or something like that. You can of course delete it as well, which I will not do of course now. Save, so I gave it a more meaningful name or a nicer name, and I can add other systems in there. On the lower right-hand side of the start window here, you can check for updates, which will happen automatically anyhow, view some logging, and the start with Windows, which is activated, which I chose from the beginning. So whenever I start DataMiner Cube from my start menu, or if I pin it on my taskbar, you will get this window. This one is selected, so I can hit enter or just click on the tile and it will automatically download and connect to that version. Well, the first time it downloads the application or the version from that server. In this case, that was already downloaded. But if there would be a newer version, it would automatically download that newer version, of course. Now, it is automatically logging in again because I'm still logged in with my domain credentials. But what I want to show you also is the login window. So let me just quickly sign out of this session and show you what the window looks like to log in. So in this window, this is the login window. So if you're not automatically authenticating, you can actually choose here for, typically you will get this window, choose here the username and the password. Optionally with the domain, so that allows you to take existing accounts from a domain, and that is very convenient because then I don't have to remember a password for my domain account and for the DataMiner system, but I can just use the same single account which is already available on my domain. And moreover, as you saw on my computer here, it automatically logs in if I was already authenticated against Windows. So that's even more convenient. So you can specify the username and password. Remember me if it's something not related to the domain, or you can go back to your domain accounts. Here at the bottom, you can toggle between your domain accounts of your Windows and the other user. On the lower right-hand side, let me put that a little bit higher. On the lower right-hand side, you have some options. You have some options about the connection settings. I'll come back to that later on. The About window, I'll come back to that later on as well. And some logging that is available. So for now, not that important. Okay, let's go back and log in again to my DataMiner system. In the meantime, let's take another look on what we just did. So I opened up a web browser. I got immediate access to the HTML5 applications, but I went for that desktop application. Now, note that there is a prerequisite of .NET Framework 4.6, so it will automatically warn you about that, so I should not worry too much about that. And I have here still a small note that there is a possibility to use Internet Explorer to open up DataMiner Cube embedded into the Internet Explorer application. So this is hosted inside Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer will go end of life, so we are not recommending anymore to use that. If you would like to do so, you can navigate to the IP address or URL of your DataMiner /DataMiner Cube in an Internet Explorer or an Edge in IE compatibility mode, and then you can effectively still navigate to your DataMiner system. Now, if you are using Internet Explorer, there is a possibility that you might need to do a little bit of security settings without going into too much detail. If you see the error occurred in the application you were using, then it might be that the application type has been disabled. Basically, you just need to add it to your trusted sites. Then this problem should be fixed. Trust not granted can be fixed with registering the Skyline certificates. But as I said, the recommended way to connect to the DataMiner system now is to use the desktop application, not the hosted application inside Internet Explorer. Okay, as I mentioned, the welcome screen. You can add a whole series of different DataMiner systems on there. You do have the possibility to change the naming, the alias you want to have on there. You can set one as default. You can specify the entry point and some advanced arguments we will come back to later on. And as I said, the login window, it tries to automatically log in with your domain or with your account of your Windows operating system you are already logged in with. If that's failing, then you get this login window. You can toggle between both at the bottom. Now, those arguments that I mentioned, so I mentioned you have some arguments, let me remove myself. Some arguments you can specify in there. Well, actually in IE, you can also specify them in the address bar, and for the arguments in the desktop application, you specify them there. The separator is different. It's an and sign over here. It's a space over there. So what is in there? In this case, it says View Europe, USA, and the app settings. So what basically happens is you can specify certain arguments that are listed here, and you can say that a specific element, service, or view should be opened immediately upon startup of your application. So if you say view Europe, it will immediately, when you open up the DataMiner Cube application, also open up that view. So that's sometimes convenient to immediately have a specific window open. All right, so we were connected to our DataMiner system. Let me just show you and go maybe to the operations where we have a world map. So we have a header bar, we have the side panel here, and we have a certain view open here. So we have indeed our header. The sidebar is by default on the left-hand side. If you prefer, you can also have it on the right-hand side. This is one of those user settings, those preferences that a user can have, and this is more specifically underneath the surveyor sidebar docking position, where you can move it left or right. And then you have the card pane that is open here, and that's basically your card of choice that will be opened there. We'll navigate a little bit and play around with some cards in just a second. And at the bottom, we have our alarm console where we can manage our alarms. We will go in more in depth on that in one of our later videos. Okay, so if I actually close all the cards on my window, you will notice that you will have some background or pulse page, as we call it, where it says like, hey, good afternoon, and immediately shows you on the left-hand side some of your recent activity and also pinned items. Conveniently, I can pick up on work I was doing before. On the right-hand side, or the middle side, I should say, I see an alarm distribution graph of how many alarms in the last 24 hours were actually happening in my DataMiner system. And you have at the bottom some updates that are available and some tips and tricks and news articles that are available in there. So that's just an informational background page. You can just click on one of those history items or select something from your surveyor to open up your card again. Now, to navigate by default, and this is important, it is operating under what I call a single card behavior. So it means whenever I select something in my surveyor, in my tree structure, it will open up the associated cards. So it could be a view with some graphics and some details, element lists of the view, could be in specific elements, so a data source, an element, a system that I'm opening up with all the data readings, and I can dive into some settings and I can maybe see some graphics of the device. Or a service or an element, but each time if I click something, it basically replaces that card and shows you all the details about that. So if I play around with my DCP DMA, I'm currently in the world view. I can go to Europe, I can open up Brussels, for instance, open up a specific device in there. So that's allowing you to quickly navigate around and do something, go to a specific device and see all the details there. So that is something that is very convenient for daily operations. You just click and you see all the details. If you have a specific element or view, you have that side panel here where you can navigate through all the details of a specific, in this case, element. I can see some readings, a task manager of this server, or if I'm talking about a specific view, I can actually, I can actually see the visuals, or I can see also what content or which devices or data sources are in there. So all the elements and actually also a service here. So you click and you see all the details. That's the main principle of it. Now, you can also use the back button to go back and to navigate your path back as you just went through. But if I want to open up several things together, I can actually go also for opening multiple cards. And how does that work? let's take a look at that. Let's say that I'm working here on this Microsoft server, and suddenly something pops up in, let's say, Italy here, or in London, or actually the Netherlands is in a critical state. So I can right click on there. And well, if I would just click on it, it would just replace my Microsoft server here. So I can right click on it there. Instead of opening, I can open it up in a new card, and then it will basically open it up next to each other. Note also that instead of using the right click, I can also use the control click. So now I'm holding my control key and on my keyboard, and I also click on London, and now it opens up in a separate window. So that allows you to just hold your control key and just click on a couple of items, and you immediately have the necessary views open. Now, the layout is something that is defined because I have like one which is a little bit bigger, so I can put the world map there on top, and two that are smaller. Well, if you click on your user icon, you will see that you have there the change layouts. And the change layout allows you to specify, currently I'm on a master top. So the one on top is the master and is a little bit bigger, but I could also go for proportional, for instance. Then I could have like 4 cards next to each other. And I can also go for a master left, right, top, bottom, or a tab layout. So that's also a convenient one. You can still have it full screen, and you can easily navigate between the different items you have open here. So the tab layout might also be a convenient one for you. Proportional, I'll go back to that one. Note that you can also make items smaller and bigger, or move the separators to reposition the way you want it to be there. If you want to reorganize it, you can just select one, or take one by the small color-coded header bar and just take it and move it to another position. So that's how you can easily reorganize your layout. So that's how you can very easily press and hold the control key to select a couple of items in your surveyor, open up several cards together into one single view there. Reorganize it whenever you're finished, and remember, you can choose the layouts here underneath your user icon. Note underneath your hamburger menu, this is the hamburger menu, the options menu of a card. You can find some more items like back, forward, some actions, but here you can also undock a card. So you can actually take out one specific card and have it in a pop-up. So this is now very convenient to put it, for instance, on a second monitor. So if I have multiple monitors, I can actually just take out a card, put it on a separate window. I can close it or dock it back. So if you close it, you close the card, Europe is gone. Well, the card is gone. Or I can just dock it back, and then it basically goes back into my cube. Note that you can also, as I just did, just drag it outside of the cube window. So let me just do that again, dock it again. So if I take my card, I can reposition it, so left or right, and I can also drag it outside of my DataMiner Cube, and then it automatically takes it out as well. So to undock, you actually have a couple of different options. You just drag it out, you use the hamburger menu here with the undock, or, didn't mention that one yet, you can also right click and open it immediately here in an undocked card. So that gives you lots of flexibility to reorganize your layouts and things like that. We've mentioned now, the control click to open up a new card. I didn't mention you can also use the shift click to open up Europe in a new card as well. So you can control click or shift click. Those are 2 shortcuts you might want to remember. Note that DataMiner Cube has a lot of shortcuts. You can take a closer look in the help on some more shortcuts. because you can basically operate DataMiner Cube without a keyboard and mouse. If you're skilled in it, you can actually study some more keyboard shortcuts in there, in the help. Now, opening multiple cards, as I already mentioned, you can drag and drop and move the edges to make them wider or bigger, things like that, and the layout, the changing of the layout in the user menu. I already mentioned that. Now taking a look at the header bar. The header bar has in here the DataMiner name and also the name that I specified in my start menu there. I said not dcp.dma.skyline.be with the URL, but I gave it the capitalization or the capitalized name DCP space DMA. Actually, you see in the screenshot you have some icons here. We don't have those. Well, actually, I can already show you here next to my username. I can click on there and I can say show cube sites. And that allows me to actually have those dots here. And if I'm working here on Europe and operations, and I suddenly need to work on another device or another problem, or maybe the alarms, I can just click on a second workspace. It opens up a blank page again, and I can continue to do some more detailed work, for instance, on the Microsoft server, and easily go back and forward between two different things that I'm working on. So that allows you to easily switch between different workspaces. So optionally, you can show those yes or no. Also, the cluster name, you can show that yes or no. So the DCP DMA that is indicated there, yes or no. While I'm here at the settings here, you can also show the server time. That is specifically interesting if your server is not running on your client's time. Maybe it's in a different time zone, running on UTC. So this is the time that you should use within your DataMiner system. If, for instance, an alarm happens here in the alarm console, this is the time that it is being generated against, not my client computer time. Maybe I'll remove that again to declutter that a little bit. In the middle, I have a search, which is very convenient to find something. If I'm looking for instance, for the Bruges view, I can immediately find Bruges and Brussels also, but also some equipment inside Bruges, because my naming convention allows it to quickly pinpoint those as well. So you can easily find and open up Bruges as well. I can go back there. Now, on the right-hand side, I see my user icon. So I'm currently logged in with Bert van den Berge. And if I click on there, I have some more settings. Let's take a closer look at that. So first of all, we have our name, of course, and some account details. Without going into too much details, you will find some user settings there, maybe taken from the domain as well, some membership permissions, some alerts that I can configure. We'll cover those in other sessions. So some general user account details. That's the name of the server I'm connected to. And here I have no online contacts. Well, actually, I'm the only one online on this DataMiner agent for now. If there would be somebody else online, you would immediately see here the list of your other people or contacts or colleagues that are also available there. I do have that in here, where there is another person online. And the nice thing is I can immediately right-click on there and start a chat session. So that allows me, if somebody else is online, to reach out to him and to help, to get some help from him. Like if you're working on something and you need to double check something with another colleague, you will see, oh, this person is also working on the DataMiner system as we are now, and I can reach out to him. So you can just right click, start a chat session. Yeah, the disconnect, that is only available if you have sufficient rights, but you can actually disconnect another user as well if you have these kind of admin rights. If you start a chat session, you can just type a message, send it, see the whole history there. That's as we would expect with the chat feature. So you can go back to contacts, or you have different tab pages with the different users that are basically, or where you have a conversation with in different tab pages there. Small note about the chat messages you are exchanging here. Be aware that those chat messages are also being added to the audit trail, the information messages in the DataMiner system. So you can actually go back and say, yesterday around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, we had a problem there. You will see maybe that somebody logged into the system, he was changing some settings, and he was reaching out to a colleague to get some help as well. That's all being added into the information events. So there is a full audit trail of the chat messages in those information messages as well there. And actually, just a quick trick is you could pick up those information events with a correlation engine. So you can actually trigger with a certain message in the chat a correlation rule. Anyhow, so now I'm going to the user settings. Let's take a moment to take a closer look at the user settings, or at least some of them. So the user settings, if I go there, you will see that I do have some user settings and computer settings. Yeah, there are just a few more performance related or connection related things that are stored on a computer, but the bulk and the most important options are actually stored with your user. And the interesting part is it is stored with your user on the DataMiner system. So if I'm connecting here and if I'm changing something, for instance, like the background theme to Skyline Black, if I OK that, I will now have basically the possibility to see my DataMiner Cube in the black theme. If I use another computer tomorrow, or maybe a workstation in the Network Operations Center, and I log in with Bert, it will again use those same preferences that I have here. So those settings are being stored on the server together with your user accounts. I'll put it back to the lighter theme for now. So the background theme could be an interesting one. One I want to mention as well is maybe connection, because by default, this user interface will automatically disconnect after 1 hour of inactivity. If you don't want that, maybe it's open up on a screen somewhere in front of the Network Operations Center, and you don't want it to disconnect every hour, or you have to wiggle the mouse every now and then. You can disable that, or you can extend the time as well. So you can change the time or extend this, or just disable it. Another one I want to mention is, well, you have some regional settings here, and you can change the language as well of the user interface. The surveyor I was mentioning before, the docking position left or right, so you can choose on which side of DataMiner Cube you have your surveyor tree structure. So that's another one which is in there. There are some more options that we will see throughout the training in some other modules. I think that's the most important that I wanted to mention here. One last note on the settings is on the lower left-hand side. I have access to configure groups. Depends on your security, if you have that button, yes or no. But I would just want to mention that it is possible as an administrator to configure the user settings for a whole group. So if I have a group of operators, I can immediately say like, oh, for all those operators, I will change, for instance, the default language of the user interface, or I will maybe change it to a black theme, or change the automatic disconnect time. things like that. So you can immediately apply that to a complete group of users. Do note, you actually have two ways of changing it. For instance, if I say like, I want the user interface for security reasons to automatically disconnect after 10 minutes, you can actually suggest that and they can still overrule it, or you can actually enforce it so that they can no longer change it anymore. Then it's basically enforced without going into too much detail there. Just remember that this is possible. Okay, so that was some of the user settings that I definitely wanted to mention. Now, if I take a closer look at some of the other items, so we were at settings, change layout, we already had. System center and agent is more administrative things. So I'm not going to go into detail on those items in here. The help, so that is conveniently available by clicking there, help, it opens up in a new window where you have access to an HTML version of the help, where you can see some of the details there. You can easily, well, maybe one note on the help is that you can also open it up in a web browser. Let me just open up in a separate window. At the bottom there is an open up in a separate window. So it goes to your DataMiner agent /help, where you can find some more items on all the different sections you have here on the left, or you can also search for topics. For instance, on visual overview, you want to have some more information. So editing a visual overview, for instance, in your DataMiner system. All right, so that's the help that is available in there. Another thing, if you want to check the about window, you do have the possibility to open up the about window, not in here, but in here, by clicking on your user, going for about. In the about window, you will find some general information with the version that you are currently running here. Some more details, also on the libraries that are being used. That's more debugging purposes, you could say. All these things are available in there, and licensing. All that information can also be exported, the debug information, export debug information on the lower right hand side. You can immediately email that, open up log file, or copy the about information to easily paste that into an email. Next to that, we also have the check for updates. We're not really into the administrator part yet, so check for updates will become more important later on in one of the other videos. And you also have a shortcut to the HTML5 version of this Cube interface. So you can also check that out. We already had that on the homepage of DataMiner. And a sign out, which I've already used before. Now, before I wrap it up, a small word on the communication, because between the desktop application and the DataMiner server, there is a specific communication called .NET remoting that is being used. So .NET remoting, you have to be aware that this is using a single user-definable TCP port to do the communication, and that is by default port 8004. So you do need to have access over port 8004 towards your DataMiner agent. That's the minimum. You can change this port 8004, but by default, that's the port we have in there. Now, to show it a little bit bigger maybe here, so what will happen if I open up the DataMiner Cube client, it will connect over HTTP for verifying some settings on port 80 or 443, depending on which one is available. And then it will set up the communication going to the DataMiner agent on port 8004. Now what happens is when we retrieve the information, we want to be aware also of notifications or events about alarms happening, color coding of the elements and the views that are updating. So these kind of events need to come into my client. To make it as efficient as possible on a local network, we typically want to use the eventing mechanism, and that goes back on a random port. That's the nature of this communication mechanism. It's a random port. So if you are working over a VPN or there's some firewalls in between, it is possible that this random port connection will not get back to your client. What will happen is you connect, you see everything, but you don't see any alarming or color coding yet. And you're like waiting, and it takes about 30 seconds. And after 30 seconds, it automatically switches to what we call the polling mechanism. And it will start, your client will start polling the information, all the events, and getting it from the server without using the automatic eventing. That's not something we want. We don't want to wait 30 seconds. So if you ever get this pop-up where you need to wait 30 seconds, you should reconfigure your system so that it automatically immediately starts with the polling and it never tries the eventing. You can do so by going to the options of your DataMiner Cube, but I would not recommend changing the connection type. I would always leave it on auto because you don't want to do it on 10, 20, 100 different client stations or all the users of your DataMiner system. So typically you leave this one on auto. On the next slide, you can actually change it and put it on polling here, but I would safely or silently ignore this one, and I would go back and leave it on auto. And instead, you should go to your DataMiner agents. You will find in there the Skyline DataMiner directory, the web pages directory, and a file named connectionsettings.txt. And in this file, you can actually specify that the clients that are connecting, they should not use eventing, or maybe certain IP range should not use eventing, but immediately start with the polling and poll the server or the DataMiner system every second, for instance, for new alarms. A little bit less efficient than eventing, but it gets the job done on the more firewalled environments. So if you ever get that 30 seconds, and here you have a screenshot of that pop-up, timeout, switching to polling, possibly due to some firewall settings, that's not expected behavior. You should change that system to have it immediately on polling. Let me take one step back. So also communication in between DataMiner agents is using port 8004. Here it is, 8004. So between the different DataMiner nodes, you also need to have port 8004 open. It is possible, although, that you could maybe have some kind of node that is on a remote location and you can only open up port, let's say 3000. You can reconfigure it and you can say like, okay, this one is using a different port. So there are possible ways of changing that. You can find some more help or instructions in the DataMiner help, or you can also, of course, reach out to us. So remember the polling, it should not get you that pop-up. Now, we got started with the DataMiner Cube application. So we opened up a web browser, we typed in the URL, and we got to this homepage where we can immediately access the HTML5 application. But we went for that Cube desktop application we downloaded. So we just downloaded it, it automatically installed, it automatically logged in because I have my domain credentials, and I had access to my system. Once I had access to my system, I was able to just open up several windows, an element, a view, a service, just by clicking on it, single card behavior, or I could use the control or shift key, mainly the control key, to open up several cards next to each other into a workspace. And the header bar, we took a quick look at that. We had the Cube sites we can have in there. We have the search, and we do have underneath our user a range of settings like changing the layout, changing some settings, the dark theme, or the language of your user interface, accessing the help. All of these goodies are underneath your user icon there. Okay, so I think that was a good start to get connected and get acquainted with the DataMiner Cube interface. In the following videos, we will dive into specific sections of the DataMiner Cube interface and get a little bit more detail and goodies of those different sections there. See you next time.